All right, let's talk about your kitchen knife, pocket knife, whatever it is that you just got. So you've now got a beautiful knife in the kitchen. You want to keep that thing razor sharp. And so a lot of people aren't sure how to go about doing that. A lot of people go and they buy these little gimmicky items, you pull the knife through the sharpening block, and don't do that kind of stuff. That's really, really bad for the knife, and it's not going to get at that razor edge. And if it's a custom knife that you bought from somebody like myself, it's really just going to destroy the thing, and we don't want to do that. So how do we keep our knives sharp? Well, a lot of times people think that you need to use some type of sharpener, and so they go to, sharpening stones. I got different sharpening stones here, diamond stones, Arkansas stones, all kinds of stuff. But to be honest, if your knife is sharp and you decide to take care of it, you will almost never have to go to sharpening stones of any sort. My philosophy, and I live by it, and all my knives are razor sharp, is sharpen once, polish often. So I actually learned this from my grandfather. He was an avid carver. The guy carved all the time, and he almost never had to sharpen his knives, and he could shave the hair off his arms with them, no problem. I was like, Grandpa, how in the heck do you keep your knives so sharp and not sharpen them? So it's all about stropping. So let me explain to you how this works. So the idea is any knife is just a wedge, and over time, as you use that wedge, the tip gets little defects in it, right? So when we're looking at our knife, the edge along the top here, you start to get a little nick here, a little ding there, or a little bit of a roll there. It just comes from usage. I mean, you're hitting, chopping boards and cutting boards and things like that. Hopefully you're not using your kitchen knife on like a ceramic plate or something like that. A lot of people don't realize that a ceramic plate is the absolute worst thing you could possibly do to a knife. They make sharpening stones out of ceramic, so that will dull your knife really quick. But just your normal use, you're going to get little dinks and nicks and edges. And so as you get these little bends, what we want to do is we want to straighten that edge. Because if you look at it edge on like this on a microscopic level, what you're going to see in your edge is a lot of little waves and bends, and that's not helping us with the sharpness. So what we want to do is we want to straighten it. And that's where you see a lot of chefs go to things like this. This is a honing rod. And I don't usually recommend this for the average user. I myself aren't a big fan of the honing rod. And the reason is because with a lot of the high-end knives that you're going to get from makers, they have very high hardness steels, and the edges have been ground very, very fine. So like if you look at a lot of these knives, like they'll flex underneath your nail. And so you don't want to go chopping your knife into a piece of metal. It's not necessary. So what I say is every now and then, if you've been cutting pretty solid for a week or so and you've really been doing a lot of cooking, what you'll want to do is you'll want to pull out a strop. So if you buy a knife from me, I usually make a strop for you, usually a smaller one like this. You could buy really big ones online. They're like $20 or something like that, but I usually throw one of these things in so that you'll have a sharp knife for years to come. And basically all it is a piece of leather that's glued to wood, and then there's some type of jeweler's rouge or polishing compound that's been rubbed into the leather. But honestly, you don't even need the rouge. You could just do this with a plain piece of leather. For myself at home, I actually just take a piece of wood, and that's an old belt. And basically what happens is, what we're going to do is we're going to take that knife and we're going to drag it down the leather. So basically, like you've seen a million times in old movies where like a barber's going to use a straight razor, before they take that razor to somebody's face, they want to true their edge on that razor, and they want to make sure that it's perfect and straight. And so what they're going to do is you take it and you put the edge down, and with gentle pressure, you don't want to push super hard, you want to just drag the knife down the leather and then flip it over, and you want to move away from the edge, right? We don't want to cut into the leather. So you're just going to drag it this way with gentle pressure. We don't want to stand it up all the way. We'll round the edge over, especially if there's any polishing compound in it. But we just want to do this a few times. So, I usually do it like maybe 10 times or something like that if it's been a while since I've done it. And at that point, what you're doing is, as you're dragging this wedge down, that leather and that compound is either, it's going to do two things. It's going to straighten it back up, or the leather has a little bit of a grit to it, a very small, very fine grit, and it'll polish that right off and expose that sharp tip right underneath. And so with just the leather, you're just going to be straightening it. But if you add one of these rouges, like I just use the Flex Cut Gold. This is what I've always used because my grandfather started me carving, and the first carving set that I came with, they had a really small bar of this. And you just take it and you just rub it into the leather, and it just helps the cut. It just helps it go a little bit faster. But there's a lot of people use the greens like this. This works just fine. They all work just fine. It's just speeding it along. Like I said, the leather will do it all on its own. But we want to stay away as much as we can from sharpening all the time, because every time you sharpen, the stone is removing metal. And if you continuously sharpen, you're taking years off your knife, because every time you sharpen it, you lose this metal at the end of the knife. Lose it, lose it, lose it. You're reestablishing a new angle down lower, lower, lower. So you'll notice how thick this is right here compared to how thick it is down here after we've sharpened for years. The thinner the wedge, the more razor and laser-like it's going to be. So we don't want to go to the stones very often. I would say this knife right here, it's probably been a year. And between me and my wife, we cook at least 4 times a week. And this thing is still super sharp. I just am really good about once a week or so. If we've really been using it a lot, I strop it and the thing stays razor sharp. So at the end of the day, it's gonna cut no problem. And that's just going without the stones. Really, the only time I use the stones is when I'm sharpening a knife for a customer. Hope this helps you out. Sharpen once, polish often.